Hi everyone, I'm Emma.
And I'm Mike.
And together we are the team that created Objective Secured, and we're here today to show you our second how-to video. This time it's how to use a traffic light system for team events.
Yeah, the team events cross over a number of different game systems all around the world. We're going to be focusing on Warhammer 40,000 today, and that's mainly because it's where most of our events are hosted from.
And because in 4 days' time we're running a 2-day team event for Warhammer 40,000.
Yes, so
that's where our head's at the moment.
Yeah,
but really what we're going to talk about today is transferable into any game system.
Yeah, the reason that we'll give you the reference for Western Australia's team challenge, the WATC, is each team event is going to be slightly different. How many players you have access to, how the forces for those players are structured, and how the matchups are driven. Now, if you're interested in checking out anything regarding the WATC, there'll be links in the description for the matchup process, which is a separate video on our YouTube channel, as well as the players pack for the 2019 WATC and the mission pack for the WATC. So you can go and check out the event specifically. There'll also be a link to the mission, to the army lists that are being used for the event as well, in case you're interested. The event itself is based on the ETC, the European Team Championships format. So we only use 6 players, where the ETC generally uses 8 for 40k.
And the American Team Championship, they have 5 in their
teams of 5 for America, yes. 6 for us. We tried it with 4. Doesn't really.
We tried it with 4 the first year, and
it's not as
the
conducive.
matchup process was, I guess, there was less involved in the matchup process.
Yeah, and 6 has worked really well the last 2 years in a row. The third year seems to be it'll be no different. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah.
The first question is why do you need a traffic light matchup process? There's a few reasons why. The first thing is obviously to give the captain a method of assessing how each round is going to play out. But obviously before you can even sort through that to generate this, you actually need to get access to the other team's lists.
Yes. So for the event that we have this weekend, we have 16 different teams. So 16 teams of 6, there's 96 players, and we use down under pairings, and on down under pairings all of the teams are there and all of the players lists are there as well.
Yes, you can find. I'll make sure there's a link in the description below for that as well.
So as part of our system, that's where the players for this event are able to find all of their opponents' lists.
Yeah. So once you've got access to those lists, it's quite common for captains and players from teams to literally just go through them one at a time. Check out the lists. A lot of the time they'll be checked for legality to make sure you're not over points and make sure the units are correct and the upgrades are correct. And then actually start comparing your team with their team. How do you stack up in a game against these different lists? Now, unlike in a singles event where if you're going to an event with 100 players, you're only going to be playing 5 or 6 of them, it's going to be impossible for you to formulate a strategy around each of those. In a team event, your individual results matter less because as long as the team gets enough points, they still win the round. So it's completely possible for a team to manipulate the scoring in such a way with the matchups that they could deliberately have a game that they can't win in order to make sure there are other games they will. And that's kind of what this process is all about. So,
and it's about making sure that, because as you say, it is the combined result of your entire team that effectively decides whether or not your team wins or loses. It's about making sure that you're maximising your matchups to get as many points as possible for your team.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why you want to start doing this sort of matchup-driven spreadsheet is to kind of highlight that on the day you only get between 10 and 30 minutes depending on the event. We have 3-hour rounds for WATC, which in practice normally means about 2 hours 45 for a game and about 15 minutes for the matchup process. You get a little bit more at things like the ETC where they're only playing 2 games a day.
Yeah.
But if you go into that blind, then you're in a position where you can't make educated decisions and follow through the process to understand, particularly it's been nicknamed by our local players as the flop at the tail end of the process, where you only get say over the first 4 matchups and 5 and 6 are kind of the leftover process.
Yeah. So
it's really important that you understand that process, but also understand where you can maximize your results from the team.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the spreadsheet that's on the screen now. As you can see on this side, this column here, this is my team. It's called my team.
Beautiful.
We have 6 players. We have an Eldar, an Anari, a Necrons, a Genestealer Cult, a Space Marines, and an Astra Militarum, colloquially known as the Guard. Our opponents for this round listed across the top here. We have an Eldar, a Chaos, the Chaos being a mixed Chaos force, a Tyranids, a Tau, a Space Marines, and a mixed Imperium force. What would normally happen is this would be supplied blank to the team, and the team individually...
This is supplied by the captain.
By the captain.
Not by us.
Yes.
So if you're going, oh my goodness, I haven't got this, I should have got it, where do I find this? No, this is an Excel spreadsheet with, 36 or 40-something cells highlighted. That's it.
So this is...
relatively easy for you to make yourself.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Now, what we've got here is each of the players then fills out a traffic light process, with green being a good matchup, red being a bad matchup, and yellow being a mixed result.
Could go either way.
And you get a spreadsheet that looks very much like this. So using the bottom row as the example, our Astra Militarum player does not want to play the Eldar or the Tau, but feels like he should win against the Chaos, the Nids, and the Space Marines, and is a mixed game against the Imperium. So he's actually got a pretty good round. He's got 3 greens there, and only 2 reds. It's not bad at all. Now, if we look further up at the Inari row, this row right here, he's got 4 greens, a yellow, and a red, which is obviously he's going to be very happy as long as he doesn't have to play that Imperial army at the tail end there.
Mm-hmm.
You then got players who have a bit more of a mixed bag. Our Necron list has got 2 red, 2 yellow, 2 green. It's not a terrible round, but it's not a great round.
Beautiful fence sitter there.
But by and large, it actually looks like a pretty good round for our team.
Yeah.
So often a red, green, yellow is enough to start formulating a basic strategy. It only gets a bit awkward as players start being less decisive about whether they think they win or lose.
Mm.
Now, if, for example, we had a situation... I'll just change these now. We have a situation where this particular player supplied his matchups like this. Our Astra Militarum does not want to play the Eldar, and then doesn't really know how he's going to go against the other players. As a captain, that makes it really awkward to make those decisions, because at this point in time, what you're essentially telling your captain is, I don't want to play the Eldar, but I'll play anyone else. I just don't know how I'm going to go.
Mm.
And that, as a captain, to form a strategy for winning the round becomes really difficult.
Yeah. So, because I know that if I play the Eldar, I'm going to lose, but it could go either way for any of those other armies.
Yeah, exactly. So, as a captain, at that point, you have to start making some decisions about how you use that particular player.
Mm.
So what we would actually suggest is, if you do have a list that it uses, like I've just shown, a whole bunch of yellows, actually get the players to go back and change the way they've matched their first guesses, and change it so that they've got 5 different results as opposed to 3.
So we move from a traffic light system into a Likert scale.
Yes. So a green being, yes, I'm going to win this game. Often it's a lime green, is I'm probably going to win this game. A yellow is a draw or close enough to a draw.
Yeah.
An orange or amber,
thank you,
would be I'm probably going to lose, and a red is I'm going to lose.
Yeah, or I'd sort of think of it that red is I'm going to lose and I'm probably not going to pull any points from it, or if it is, it's going to be 1 or 2. The amber, okay, I'm going to lose, but I'm still going to pull some points from it. The yellow, I'm sitting somewhere in the middle, draw type thing. Lime green, I'm going to win, but it's going to be close. And the green, yeah, no, that one's a definite win, and I'm going to...
Yeah,
no problem.
However you choose to scale that, it just gives you a bit more permutations, and it means you can go back to the players and say to them where they've got their yellows, particularly if you have a row of yellows, which is not uncommon for people first entering into a team tournament. They don't want to let their team down. They don't want to commit to it in case they're right or wrong.
Yeah.
So you see it very commonly in new players to a team environment. Asking them, once they've got their first round, you go back to your team and go, okay, guys and girls, if you have a row which does not have at least 2 greens and a red in it, you need to make those rows to have 2 greens and a red if you want to keep it in a traffic light process.
Mm-hmm.
The other option you have is to turn around to the teams and say, wherever there's a green or a red already, it stays. However, you need to go back to your yellows and look at those and either turn them amber or lime green or whatever process you're using, a 2 or a 4 if you're using a number 1 to 5, to try and give the captain as much information as possible. Because ultimately, when you start doing matchups, obviously in this particular row here, there's only 2 of our players who are a possibility against the Eldar, and against the Imperium, we've only got 2 as a possibility and a third unknown against the Imperium, which are obviously going to be our 2 hardest games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can afford to lose both of those as long as we win all 4 of these games. But that convincingly. But it does mean that we have to then allow for that in our processes. You've got to start making some decisions.
Yeah. How many points do you need to actually win a round?
As for our event, it's a total score using the ETC scoring sliding scale.
Differential.
So it's 20 points per game available with obviously a 20-0, a 10-10, an 11-9 and so on, adding to 20. So each round has a maximum of 120 points and you need 66 points to win the round.
Right.
So as soon as you tip over 66, your opponent can only get 54.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's
I guess
a draw is 55 to 65.
Yeah. What I was looking at is, so for example, in the 2 outside games, you said we can afford to lose those 2 providing we win the middle 4. Not necessarily, and we will come to this, but if you get a 20 zip loss on both of those, you're already at 40.
Yes.
You then
need to win convincingly.
That's it. You get 3 games where you win
11-9 or 12-8.
That's it.
Yeah.
And you
can't actually win at that point.
No, so it is effectively possible for you to win 4 games out of 6
and still not win the round.
But actually lose the round.
Yeah, it is. Depending on how bad the losses you suffer are.
Yeah, or how strong the wins that you take are.
Yeah. So
which is why it's, I think, important to look at having the 5 colours rather than just the 3, because say for example in our 2 outside columns. I'm sorry, I'm probably jumping ahead. So, okay, looking at the Eldar one, for example. If we know that our Inari player thinks that against the Eldar, they can win that convincingly and they can pull out 19 or 20 points, versus a GSC player, they would only give that a lime green because they actually think that might be closer to maybe 12-8. Then if we have a choice of who we're going to play, then that's when those extra colours are useful.
Yeah, look, absolutely. The trick with the matchup process, there's a few different ways you can kind of go through and figure out your possibilities, and it's very you almost have to second guess your opponent as much as anything else and understand some of the psychology around how their team's likely to function, and understanding how their lists function is really vital, because if you don't understand what the armies do, it's very easy to get caught out with a gimmick that you aren't prepared for, you think you win, and then all of a sudden you lose a game that should have been a sure thing because you just weren't prepared for it.
Yeah, and I've said it before on a few of our podcasts and Facebook Lives, but I always think if coming to a big event, if there is a game or an army list that you think, that's going to be a park walk, there's probably a gimmick or something in there that you don't realise.
Yep.
Have a look at it. Talk to your opponent. Talk to your teammates. Find out what that might be.
And some of the best players in the world will miss those gimmicks because they are so certain of their own knowledge that you just walk past it. And I've seen it firsthand as a captain where we've made critical mistakes in a matchup and lost a round as a result. I've also seen us overanalyze lists. And when it came time and we looked at the list objectively without all the fear and anxiousness and all the rest of it, we actually realized that we did have the ability to beat that particular list. And then we got the matchup we wanted and we went on to do it. Yeah. Ironically, both of those examples, I overlooked it and I got beaten really badly in the first example. And then we analysed it properly and I won the second example. So I can say that because I'm at 50-50 at that point.
Yeah, so that's something else that we sort of talk about as well is in those, I guess, where you've got that highlighted cell there at the bottom underneath the chaos, down there would be where you would make some notes around the armies that you're likely to be facing as well. So, for example, this has a combo that's quite unusual and it does this, or this has got X number of flyers, or, this has got this particular special feature. And,
yep, absolutely.
Those kinds of things. So there's 96 different armies in the room. You could be playing off against 90 of them. You can't remember all of those. Just having a little bit of a cheat sheet is useful.
And as a captain, having Eldar on the screen in this column doesn't actually tell me as a captain anything.
Not when there's how many Eldar armies that are going to be there.
So having a brief summary under here,
1
row each, and it might be simple as writing Eldar, 3 Crimson Hunter Exarchs, 3 Fire Prisms, Farseer, Eldrad, 2 Guardian Bombs, watch out for the Ulthway Guardian Stratagem, Jinx on Hemlocks, those sorts of notes, so that as a captain, when I'm sat there, it often highlights things that get missed during the initial phases of this matchup process, where you write it all out there and you get to the table and, for example, our GSC have got it marked as a green in this case, all of a sudden there's a moment of realization where you go, hang on a minute,
Did you remember
we
that
we
this
haven't
could do
we haven't
this?
spotted this. That can't be a green for you.
Yeah.
So often it's a great mental jog on the moment, especially if you've later in the event, as some of the team's gimmicks have been used in the room, and you've been able to spot
People
them
talk about them
at
and-
lunch and those sorts of
yeah.
things. It's quite often able for you to adjust your score slightly as well. So we're going to move on to the actual matchup process here, and there are several ways you can approach this process. We'll go through it the first way as per the video in the description.
Yes.
However, we're going to assume that my team has lost the dice roll for who gets to pick the first table, which means our opponents are going to put things up first. Now, if you look at this, it would make a great deal of sense for my opponent to put their Eldar up first. Because if the opponent agrees with our assessment, they're looking and thinking they're going to win at least 4 of the 6 games. However,
this is interesting. I'm not sure I would put that up first.
However, my suggestion would not be to put it up first.
Because if you put that up first, like, so say for example, you put Eldar up, I'm going to put Inari and GSC as the 2 that you have.
Well, you've got to remember
choose.
it's also done blind. So you have to pick one to put up straight away while I pick one to put up straight away. And then we reveal them at the same time. So you don't know that my Eldar are up first. So you
I
can't.
forgot that it had changed.
You
'cause
can't bank
used
on
to-
it.
You used to put one up, and then I got to choose 2 to go against
No,
it.
it's done blind. So you can't guarantee that. So this is where you have to start second guessing what your opponent is likely to do. And then, so you can either go, there's 2 ways you can go. You can be really proactive and just go, this is our strategy. These are where we think our lists work best in the process, and we're going to do that. Or you can get involved in the psychology of it and try and understand what your opponent's likely to do and try and have answers for that through the process while still achieving your own goals. So getting into the matchup process here, you've got to decide how they're going to behave if you want to try and counter them. So assuming that they're going to put their Eldar up first, we're going to...
Because it would make sense that they put that up first.
Because they only have... and again, assuming that they're going to mirror that. Now, obviously, if you got the opponent's spreadsheet, it's likely to be very different. But you have to take some educated guesses as to how they're likely to play. And this is the only educated guess you can make with the information at hand based on what your players think they can do with their opponents. So if you assume their Eldar is going up first, you want to have your Inari and GSC in hand. So now we can look at the rest of the chart. So once we take that column out of the equation, because we are assuming that that's going to go up first, we can now look at the rest of the chart. Our Eldar only has 1 bad matchup. Our Inari only has 1 bad matchup. Our Necrons only have 1. Our GSC only have 1. Our Marines only have 1. And our Guard only have 1. So that actually bodes really well. Because with all of them only having 1 red, it actually doesn't necessarily matter which of the remaining 4, because we want to keep our Inari and GSC in hand. It actually doesn't matter too much who we put forward, because we can inevitably just pick the matchup we want as opposed to the one we don't want.
Yes.
What I'd actually be inclined to do, though, is look at trying to draw out one of the ones that we don't like. So, for example, this Nid one here has 2 red. This Imperium one here has 3 reds. Now, assuming that the Imperium list is as strong as it looks there, they're obviously going to have 3 greens, 2 reds, and a yellow. As soon as the 2 reds come out, which are the Necrons and the Marines, as soon as there's only 1 red, that can be their next put-up.
Yeah.
So at that point, we don't really want to use our Necrons or our Marines, because we want to keep those in hand to be able to offer those as counters if that comes about. The Guard one we can also afford to keep in hand because it's a wash. We don't know what the result for that's going to be, which actually, by nature of an elimination, leaves us with our Eldar to be put up first. So by making those assumptions, we can safely put our Eldar up, knowing that the likely result, if all of our players are correct and accurate, that we should be in a position where they're going to put their Eldar up, and we're going to have only 1 bad matchup left for ours, which is going to take one of the other lists out of the equation, and we're going to be able to offer 2 really good counters to their Eldar. So the plan works perfectly, and we move on to the following phase, and you can continue to do this process. As you get towards the end, it gets more complicated, because when you get to games 5 and 6 in the format, and it's the same for games 7 and 8 in the ETC format as well, you end up in a position where you've only got 1 card in hand, and you've got one list in hand, and 1 list that wasn't selected as a matchup still on the table. And the one that's in your hand plays the one of theirs that's on the table, and the one that's on the table for us plays the one that's in their hand to be used. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to step through that.
Beautiful.
So they won the dice roll, so they're going to be able to select the first table. So I'm going to put my team and opponent's team. They have put forward their Eldar, and we have put forward our Eldar. Now,
when they put forward their Eldar, so we each put forward our team choices at the same time.
Yes, and they're revealed at the same time.
And they get flipped at the same time.
Yes.
I'm doing the hand gestures that no one can see. They get flipped at the same time, and then we get to look at the fact that they've put Eldar up, and we then get to choose that we get them to offer 2 for who we would like to go against their Eldar,
and
they get
pick
to
one.
choose from that.
Yes.
So, so we're just going to kind of go through this that way.
Now, again, if I'm the opponent in this particular case, and we reverse all the colours, by the looks of it, that Anari army is really bad for my team. There's a lot of reds there.
Yeah.
The GSC is a bit more of a mixed bag. There's only 2 reds, because obviously they're green for us, so they'll be red for the opponent. So I actually have an opportunity here with my Eldar, even though it might lose me a round, to what is colloquially known as bussing someone.
Beautiful.
In giving them a really poor matchup, knowing that they're going to lose, to try and take that out of the equation because it makes the rest of the round better. In this case, the Inari is the worst one for my team to play, so I do have that option right now. I've only got one list that thinks it can win, which is the Imperial Army, and I would assume at that point my opponent knows that. So at this point, it actually makes sense. As long as I can get good matchups going in the later rounds, I could probably afford to take the Inari out and sacrifice my Eldar. The problem you've also got here is that if we go down this road, and we will, and then I'll go back to the start, because as soon as you get one of the guesses wrong, it changes the whole dichotomy.
Yeah.
We've put our Eldar up, going back to my team. I've got their Eldar up, and we know that they can't select their Eldar. And it means that, even if we pick Imperium, we still have to offer them 2 options. Now, if we reverse the colour scheme, I think we're actually going to be offering them Imperium and it'd probably be Tau at that stage. Because, again, the Tau list's a funny one in that we think it's actually a good round for us. There's only 1 red there. We can't offer Chaos because that's all essentially reds and yellows for the opponent's team. The Nids is probably a good put-up following rounds, or the Imperium for that matter. But Nids is also a red matchup for us, so we don't really want to do that. Marines is a red matchup for us, which kind of just forces you in a position where you've only got Tau and Imperium. So logically, the Tau get taken out of that equation because you want to make sure that we've got a yellow matchup for it, they've got a yellow matchup for it, whereas we've got a red against the Imperium. They've obviously got that as a green. So that essentially means we would pick the Tau.
Yeah.
So we go through that same process a second time. They have to pick one and we have to pick one. So I'm going to black out the rows that
much easier for me to be able to look.
The rows that are now removed.
And go the other way as well.
So,
Eldar's gone.
so these 2 rows are gone as well.
Beautiful.
So that's what we're left with. Now, looking at that as an option changes the game significantly, because our guard list, our Astra Militarum, is now a perfect put-up. It has no bad options, and we can guarantee ourselves a good one if we want to. So that makes a lot of sense for us. For our opponent, this is all bad for the Chaos. They want to get that Marine matchup there.
Yeah.
The Nids is actually their best bet, because they've got 2 greens, a yellow, and that'll obviously be a red.
Yeah.
That's a really mixed bag. That's not great.
Yeah, so Nids is going to be their strongest, isn't it?
So you've actually got 2 choices there from the opponent's point of view. You can either put the Nids forward and try and fish for that green, or you can put your Marines forward and deliberately dodge the red. because these are obviously, for my opponent, these are all going to be red.
Yeah.
The problem that the opponent's facing very rapidly is you have to deal with the guard, which are obviously being put up, and the only person that can do is the Imperium. Maybe.
Yeah.
However, the Chaos just are going to lose. The Chaos are going to lose whatever we give them at this point, probably, unless we can get Chaos versus Marines. So, our best bet at this point is probably going to be the Nids. So we'll pop the Nids in there because we've got 2 greens.
Yes.
Now, what are we going to counter that with? Based on this, we can see that that's probably their best assumption. So we want to give them Necrons and Marines as their 2 options. Sorry, we want to avoid Necrons.
We want to avoid Necrons and Marines.
So we want to give them GSC or Guards. We can't give them Guard because we've already put that one up.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be GSC and something else. Now, this is actually quite advantageous to us because the GSC don't want to play the Imperium. And that means that we can, even if they put the Imperium up, we can pick whatever's, whatever else we feel like. So to deal with their Nids, we've got
Necrons, GSC, or Marines.
These 3 here.
Can put up. Yeah.
So now we need to look at those 3 rows.
And this is, as I was saying before, this is where having the 5 colours comes in. Because if we know that our Necron is going to be absolutely hammered, but our Marines may be able to pull back 4 or 5 points, we obviously want to put the Marines up and the GSC. And we hope that they'll pick the GSC, but we'll know that with Marines we can pull back a few points from that.
So, yeah, it's a really interesting one there. The good part about it, as we sit at the moment, is we don't care what's left. If they hold their Chaos back any longer and it's in hand, then and this is the other part of this equation you've got to consider, because whatever 2 you put up at this moment, whatever doesn't get picked is automatically going to drop into the next matchup with what's still in your hand.
Yeah.
So this particular part is the most crucial part of the matchup process because it decides the remaining 4 games in one go. So to play against their Nids, we've obviously the Guards out of the equation. We've got to pick Necrons, GSC, or Marines, and we've got to try and guess what they've still got in their hand. Because obviously with them putting Nids up, they've got Chaos, Marines, and Imperium. They're going to counter with 2 against our Guard, and they're going to have one in hand. And you've got to start playing the odds here and figuring that out. If it was me, I would assume the Imperium's in their hand. Because...
Okay, can you just clarify what you mean by in hand?
So... a lot of the time this is done with cards or putting physical lists onto the table.
Yes.
So you'll have a hand of 6 cards or 6 lists. So at this particular moment, we've already paired off 2 of our lists in rounds 1 and round 2.
Yep.
We've got one of our lists on the table.
Yes.
In our case, our Guard.
Yes.
And then we still have Necrons, Genestealer Cult, and Marines as lists on a card or in hand, as it were.
Right.
We have to pick 2 of those now as an option for the Nids player and put them on the table for them to choose from, which leaves us one of those lists still in hand. The one that is in hand will play the one that is left on the table from the other pairing.
Yeah.
So, for example, we'll just run through this simply. If we choose to put up our Necrons and Marines...
So just write those in the 2 columns next to it so that we can see for a minute. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, so we put Necrons and Marines up and they choose the Marines.
Okay.
Which means the Necrons are on the table.
On the table, yep.
And for our Guard, they choose to put up their Imperium and their Chaos, and we pick Chaos. So now, what's left, I'll just cross those out as well, because that leaves the Guard and the Nids and the Chaos and the Marines all come out. So that leaves us with that. Now, our Necrons, which are on the table, and their Imperium are on the table. So essentially what happens is that gets pasted to It's essentially their put up,
Yep.
and that's our put up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, I've just got that the wrong way around.
Beautiful.
Now, their Imperium now must play our Gene Stealer Cult,
Mm-hmm.
because that is what we have left in our hand.
Left. Yep.
And our Necrons must play their Marines, because that's what they've got left.
Beautiful.
So that's where we end up with the matchups.
Okay, now, can you just get rid of all the black for a second?
Right, so from here, we can now make an assessment of how we actually went for our round.
Mm.
So Aranari ended up playing their Eldar. That's really good for us. So we're going to mark that one as green. Our Eldar ended up playing their Tau, which is going to be a yellow for us. Our Marines ended up playing their Nids. That's not great. Now, at that point, the Marine lists that we had and the choices that we had, the Marines only got 2 reds, and it's not terrible, but it's not great. Our Guard got their Chaos. That's a green for us. That's another great option for us to grab. Our GSC ended up with their Imperium. Uh-oh, that's another problem.
Uh-oh.
And our Necrons ended up with their Marines, which is a yellow. So we ended up with 2 red, 2 green, and a yellow.
Which really means it's anyone's game.
It is anyone's round at that point. And this is kind of why we were talking about wanting to have a more complex process.
Yeah.
Instead of just 3, you actually really want 5, because then you can actually get a much better idea of what that round looks like. Because for all we know, the Eldar v Tau matchup might be a win, but at a minor win.
That's it.
And the Necron Marines could be the same, or we could have got it all wrong, and those might have actually been minor losses.
Yeah, but if we got a really strong win with the Eldar versus Inari, and only a very small loss with the Marines versus Nids, we're actually still doing okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, this is, as we said, this is why we kind of want to just pull that out a little bit more, so that when you are doing those put-ups, you've got the ability to kind of go, you know what, of these 2 greens, this is the stronger list against this particular opponent.
Now, there is a second way of doing this, and it's a much more aggressive style of matchup process, and it basically involves looking at the lists and saying, well, we essentially ignore what our opponent is likely to do, and we say, well, our Inari only has 1 bad matchup. So that logically is our first put-up. Because it doesn't matter what they give us, we can dodge it.
Yep.
And then you play very reactively to the matchup process, because you wait to see what they put up, and then you pick your 2 best options for that. And then when you pick the 2 best options to face it, the choice that you make as to who ends up actually playing it is then determined by the matchups that are left on the table for you to minimize the chances of you getting a red later in the process. So I'll go through it again a second time.
Because I've lost you there.
So we're going to leave this exactly as it sits now with our first round of process, and we're going to do it a second time. But this time we're going to be really aggressive with how we do our matchups. So the opponents, we're going to put up Aranari, because we know that they've only got 1 fail in terms of matchups. They're going to beat everyone else, or do well against everyone else. We're going to assume that our opponent still has the same strategy, and they're going to put their Eldar up because they only have 2 bad matchups, and then they could be again making the assumption that we're going to be holding Aranari back to counter them. All of a sudden, someone has to play their Eldar. Now, if we put the GSC up, we can almost guarantee that match isn't going to happen. So now, as a captain with my Inari out of play and my GSC put forward but essentially not going to be picked, I've only got 4 reds left to choose from. So what do I put up to counter that Eldar, knowing it's going to be picked and knowing it's going to lose?
Okay, so what we want to do is put up the red that has got the least possible options for the rest of the games.
So what's interesting here is you've got the Necrons and Marines are both green against the Imperium. And ideally we want to try and hold those, because they're the only 2 greens we have for that. So we can't pick Aranari, so they're already out of the equation. The GSC are out of the equation, which basically leaves our Eldar or our Guard. Now, both of those are pretty good. However, the Guard have more greens. The Guard have 3 greens, a red and a yellow. the Eldar are 2 greens, 2 yellows, and a red. So if we're going to sacrifice someone,
Sacrifice the
we're,
one
we're going to be
that's got the least
sacrificing.
good options.
We're going to be sacrificing Eldar, which will be picked.
Yeah.
What are they going to put up to deal with our Anari, knowing what they know? They're probably going to give us Nids and Imperium. Again, assuming that they've got a reverse colour scheme that we have, because they're not going to give us a green matchup, and we're obviously going to pick the Nids because we don't want to play the Imperium. So, let's black it all out and try again. And that leaves us something like this. So now, again, we're going to be really aggressive, and we're going to try and figure out how we can maximise our win for this round. So we've got 2 greens, a yellow and a red, 2 greens, 2 yellows, 2 yellows, a green and a red, and 2 greens and a red. At this point in time, we've still got these 2 lists in play, which we want to try and take out of with the Imperium.
Yeah.
So we're going to put our guard forward. We've only got 1 bad matchup. We've got 2 greens and a yellow. There's no 3 greens in the mix. It might make sense to pick the Marines because they don't have any bad matchups. However, because they're one of these 2 greens,
and
it actually makes
Necrons.
sense to put our guard up, because the guard essentially can have no bad matchups. Because even if they put the Tau forward, we're not going to pick the Tau.
Okay.
So again, flipping that on its head, at this point in time, the likelihood of them putting their Chaos forward is pretty low because there's no good matchups for them left. They're probably in the best position with either their Marines or their Tau. Their Tau has 1 red, 1 green, and 2 yellow. Whereas the Marines are 3 yellows and a red. However, the Marines at this point in time for the opponent make a bit more sense because you can still dodge the red, and then you've got coin toss games because there's a whole bunch of red here.
Yep.
It's a really mixed bag here.
Yep.
This is actually a pretty safe call. So, as the guard player, they can't pick their Marines, so they've only got Tau, Imperium, and Chaos. We don't want to play the Tau, so we're probably going to pick whatever else they give us.
Put up, yeah.
They're not going to give us Chaos because that's a red matchup for them, so they're going to pick the Imperium.
Yeah.
So that gives us the Imperium going here and the Tau staying on the table. For them, with their Marines, we can't select the guard, but we also don't really want to put our Marines and Necrons forward because we were hoping that we were going to catch the Imperium with that.
Yeah.
And we don't know that the Imperium's been offered as a counter at this stage because they're blind. So this is probably going to end up in a situation where our GSC is one of those lists, and then we have to choose between Marines and Necrons for the second.
Yep.
Now, when you look at what's left, you've got greens over here, but you've also got greens here. It's actually much of a muchness at this stage. So we'll put forward to play their Marines. We've basically got to pick yellow, yellow, or yellow. It's what we probably end up doing is our Marines, because they've only got a yellow here, and then they're yellow here, and they're actually probably one of our better counters.
Strongest.
And our Necrons are pretty similar as well, regardless of what's left. So we'll go GSC and Marines in this particular case. Now, they obviously don't know that we're doing that. But once they're obviously revealed, they're going to be picking the GSC. And the reason they'll pick the GSC is it gives them a chance at getting the Marines, their Chaos Army, to play them. So we're going to put our GSC in here, and we're going to put our Marines here.
Which leaves us with this.
So, their Marines, our Marines and their Tau are still on the table.
Yes.
So, their Tau goes there, and our Marines go here. Now, their Tau on the table means that their Chaos is in hand, which means that their Chaos does get to play our Marines. And our Necrons do end up playing their Tau. So
let's have a look at the scores for this one.
Yeah, so against their Eldar, we're going to...
We've done badly. This is not a good start.
We're going to start poorly there. And our Inari versus their Nids is only a yellow.
Oh,
Doesn't look great straight away.
it's not a good start. GSC versus Marines.
Our GSC versus their Marines is another yellow. Our Guard versus their Imperium is another yellow.
Oh, dear me.
Our Necrons versus their Tau is another yellow. And our Marines versus their Chaos is another yellow.
Oh, we didn't do very well at all that
No.
time.
And this was what I was hoping, and by pure coincidence it has, highlighted one of the issues of just focusing on your team.
Strength, yeah.
Because we thought that we could, because our Inari had no bad matchups, had one bad matchup, and we could dodge that. We've actually been quite selfish in the early parts of this process by trying to dodge the bad matchups, which has actually resulted in a really average round where there's no guarantee of success. Now, you can argue that the first round achieved a similar result with 2 green, 2 red, and 2 yellow. The problem is that in the first round, we have a chance of winning.
Yeah.
In this round, in theory, you could say the same, but in actual fact, it's actually more likely to be a draw or a minor loss because of that initial red selection. So it's really important that you don't just focus on your own, as a captain, even as a player, that you don't focus on your own personal results, that you focus on the greater team dynamic and the greater team success, because by being ignorant or willfully or unintentionally so to your opponent's motivations and how they're likely to pair up, we end up in a far worse situation matchup-wise because we've got 5 games that are really swingy and one that we're probably going to lose. And we've got no control over that round. Whereas in the first process, it's still going to be a close round, but we've got 2 results we're probably going to be able to bank on, 2 that we're worried about and 2 that could go either way. So it's a far more stable set of results, I suppose is the best way I can describe it. If these were broken down into more levels of incident, as in, adding those 2 extra steps, so it was a 5-step as opposed to a 3, these yellows get far more interesting because we would see a much wider range there.
Yeah, from
we could see a bunch of lime greens there, and all of a sudden it's a really good process.
Yeah.
But as it stands now, with only a traffic light, this doesn't give us a good idea of who's going to win this round. And I've made a bunch of assumptions there based on reversing results and reversing spreadsheets, but obviously your opponent's going to have their own version of this spreadsheet, and what you've marked as a green for you,
they may mark as
a green for them. Absolutely, and it happens constantly, and you can easily get caught out when you put your Inari forward going, oh, this is fine, and they offer your Inari, they offer you Chaos and Tau, and you go, oh my god, this is fantastic, and it's not. So yeah, the complexities of this matchup process are fairly huge and varied, and the human element can't be underestimated. The psychology of the opposing team and captain can't be underestimated.
No, and I guess it just goes to show that one person can come up with 2 totally different outcomes.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if I did it again,
you get a third.
I could get a third or a fourth. Or
try again, see if you can get all greens.
The problem is, obviously, like we've just said, it's completely possible for you to think, oh, I've got a really poor round, and your opponent's just as unhappy because you've managed to mess about with their matchup process. It's a really...
I suppose that's another thing to think about, that even if it looks like you've got the worst, a really bad round, you can look at it one way to how can you maximize the number of points that you get, but you can also look at it, how can you give your opponent the worst possible wins?
Yeah.
So it's about clawing back as many points as you can get, but also about basically just trying to limit the number of points you give away. Yeah,
and there's the viable strategies around, like I say, just going for your own points or trying to second guess your opponent. And if you know your opponents well enough, you can make those sorts of calls. If you know the armies well enough, you can sometimes make those calls. I
guess for some of the players who have been coming to WATC for, this is the 4th year they've come, they know some of those opponents really quite well. But if you're new to it, then you have to take things on face value.
Yeah, and it happens when people borrow lists to practice against and that sort of thing, and you see it regularly where one player plays an army one way and they get a result and they go, oh no, I can beat this, no worries.
Mm.
And then the actual player playing it plays it differently or deploys it differently.
Yeah.
There's so many variables. The goal with this, though, is ultimately to give as much information to the captain as possible so that they can make an informed decision to try and, if you say you can win with your Inari and you can beat everyone except the Imperium army, the captain has to take that at face value.
Yeah, so which means you really need to try and be as self-reflective as possible. And I guess depending on your personality type, it's easy to be overly critical or it's easy to be overly, let's say, flattering to your abilities. So you need to try and be realistic with your self-rating, because if the rating you give yourself is actually not reflective of reality, then that's actually going to impact, basically your captain may not know that, and he or she has to use the information that you've provided in order to make a good decision. So you need to give them the strongest information possible.
Exactly right. I mean, the captains can only go on what the players have and have provided them, and being aware of how the opponent plays the army is one part of it. Being aware of what the army does is another, and understanding your own limitations with the army you've selected to run is another. The last part of this we haven't really talked about is the table selection and missions.
Yeah, so I guess the table selection can actually play a big role in how different armies work on different terrain. If you've got one particular board that's really quite terrain heavy, or another board that's quite sparse, that may actually, as the captain who gets to choose which table you're playing, as the captain who gets to choose which table that particular game is going to be played on, you need to look at the missions and the terrain before you put up your first your first selection.
And that can easily change. So, for example, maybe the Eldar have decided that they can't beat the Imperium in the first row in a Hammer and Anvil mission, but it might be fine in a Dawn of War mission.
Make a note of that.
Exactly. And that's the next layer of complexity where you go, you know what, I can beat it in this mission, probably not in this mission, or there's those sorts of complications, and most of the team events will give you that information as part of the players pack. And even talking about, when you're picking your tables, like I said at the start, the player who wins the dice roll, their team picks the first table, and then it alternates back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a player that desperately needs a heavy density board, you potentially run the risk of not getting that board
if you don't put them up early.
Exactly. So you have to take that into consideration with the process as well, and how important is it for them to get a heavy or a light board in comparison to getting the right game, and is the result going to be the same on a lighter table compared to a heavier table? Most of the events will try and spread it out, so the goal for 2019's WATC is 2 light, 2 medium and 2 heavy density boards.
However, please don't hold us to that.
No, all the captains have been spoken about with this and been told that that's our goal. We've got extra terrain that we've borrowed to try and make that a reality. However, it's not a guarantee, and you can't rely on that for any tournament you attend.
Mm-mm.
So, but if you know that going in, then you can say, okay, fine. Anyone who doesn't want to play Imperial Knights, for example, doesn't think they can beat them, if you end up paired with them, go for the heavy table. Because if you can limit the movement and hide better, you might be able to stop what would have been a red, might turn it orange.
Yeah.
Or you might even sneak out a win.
Yeah. But even if you can...
That's what I did at the last tournament.
I should remember this. Is it 66 for the win?
Yes.
So you only need to get 66 points. So if you get, 3 really convincing wins and a couple of other team members manage to claw 3 points each, that's actually enough to tip you over the edge.
Absolutely.
So if you can hide so that you effectively get your 3 points, sometimes that's all you need.
Yep, and that's the last part of this, is that once the games are all up and running, the captains will generally be allowed to move between the tables or have a runner to move between the tables, whether that's a player that's finished their game already or whether that's a non-playing member of the team. Yeah. They're allowed to go between the tables, ask how the games are going, not necessarily provide any advice.
Well, not necessarily. They're not allowed to coach. They're not allowed to provide advice while the games are being played.
No, and the whole point of them being able to go between the tables is to then be able to feed that information back to the captain so that they can then say, yes, go and play,
So
like go for the win, or
yeah,
play conservatively, and those sorts of things, which in turn will give you more information about future rounds by looking at similar matchups later in the event. There's a whole bunch of competitive builds that tend to reoccur in some way, shape, or form in a similar capacity. Maybe not the same list, but there'll be similarities.
yeah,
If you finish round one, for example, in this game, our Eldar played their Tau, and we've got that marked down as a 50-50, and he wipes the floor with them, and we can actually go back through and revise our matchups later on if we identify that we were overly optimistic or overly cautious. We can add or subtract those rankings to then say, okay, you know what? Why did you win that? Oh, I completely forgot that my army could do this, or I thought their army could do that, and they can't. And you can apply that learning to later rounds to try and adjust your scoring.
Yeah.
I've seen versions of this sheet which go into way greater detail, down to actually scoring the game out of 20. And you have to put individual numbers, and then you can put a swing in, which means that I think I'm going to get a 15-5 plus or minus 3. And then it can get even more in depth by adding a calculator function where the software, through a macro, works out all the possible combinations and says, based on the numbers you've put in, these are the ones that you need to put up, these are the ones that you counter with to give you the best results later on. I think they're really, really amazing tools to use, but I also think that you can't rigidly stick to them, because the dynamics of the event and the players involved and the psychology around it can't be underestimated.
So working with people, not computers.
Also, the numbers that go into those sort of spreadsheets tend to be arbitrary, because you've got no...
what's the difference between
a 20-0 and a 19-1 and an 18-2? Like, what makes those differences? And it's hard to pinpoint those in a manner that is data-driven. But if you can get something like our spreadsheet here today in and working...
and I just wanted to touch base just for a minute about what you were saying about the captains or non-playing coaches going around and not coaching. But one of the reasons that they would do that is to be able to... So, again, we've spoken about for the event that we have for WATC, teams need 66 points in order to win the game.
Yes.
So what can happen is a captain or a non-playing team member walks around and goes, Mike, how's the game looking? Yep, good. Think I'm going to come out with a 20-0 win. Or, it's looking a bit dicey. Okay, so we're at a point where 3 players have won and we actually only need 6 points. So you can say, you know what, go for it. Or it's really close here. You're the last game we've got and we only need 3 points. We need for you to play relatively conservatively so that we can try and guarantee those 3 points. Or, you know what, we need 15 points from your game in order for us to actually win this. We need you to go all out, pull out all the stops and get as many points as you possibly can. So it's about kind of trying to look at giving some, I guess, encouragement for whether to play conservatively or whether to push a little bit harder, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. The best teams for any of the team events, whether it's the American Team Championships, the European, the Australian, or the West Australian, the best captains and the best teams are the ones who can work collaboratively for the end result. Because as soon as players put themselves to make sure that their personal win-loss record is the most important thing, particularly when it's whoever's doing the matchups, that can be a real detriment to a team. Because in our example on the screen at the moment, the Inari player, if they were the captain, could easily turn around and go, well, I've only got one bad matchup. I want a green. So
I'm going to make sure that
I get my matchup. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense in the context of what the scorecard looks like, though. And if you look, the Inari in both of the scenarios has gone up in the first 2 games because it makes the most sense strategically. Yes, you could hold it back for later in the round, but you sacrifice your early part of the round doing that. So it's really important that players on the team, the captain, all work collaboratively to try and get the best result. If you're going to have fun, you're only doing this as an exercise to make the captain's job easier to kind of get your matchups happening. But the more work you do at the front end to get this right, the more chances you have of getting it right on the day and winning games. So if your job is, if you're team is actually going to compete and wanting to try and get to that top 3 or win the event, then
Put a bit more work in.
the more prep you do, the better you will have a chance of. And there's plenty of teams who spend the entire year, they finish the event that they've just been to and they start prep for the next one.
Yeah. And we've seen photos of some team practices and seen their beautiful colour-coded spreadsheets up on the
Yep.
screens, and as I said at the time, it did make my heart sing.
And we have to thank the team, which I will not name, who supplied this spreadsheet. The armies have been changed, so there is no correlation with the teams in question. But we were fortunate to get their spreadsheet provided, so thank you very much to them. They know who they are.
We didn't have to come up with one.
Yep.
Go through and add some colours in. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they go if they have to play this team, because I still have the original spreadsheet for this one. So, and we might share that later on in another episode, but for now,
See who played who and that kind of thing.
if you want to head over to our event page on the website, there's links to everything in the description below, and we'll see you with our next how-to video.
Fantastic. Happy gaming, everyone.